There we go. Is it going? Okay, let's go. Alright guys, welcome back. And my next topic is going to be how I became goth. Now, I'm a 30-year-old, so I'm going to go back in time. I can't really pinpoint when, because for all I know, something could have influenced me as a kid. I don't really know. Star Wars, Darth Vader, who knows, like, maybe it was the whole, like, looking like a villain but being a nice guy, like that kind of thing. I don't even know. Maybe that's what kind of started everything as a kid, but either way, like, visually looking like that is what kind of, like, got me into it. So I'm going to jump into it. My first exposure to goth would be in 1997. My sister at the time was getting this magazine, and it was a Christian music magazine. It would have like metal and rock, but there was an ad for this band called Savior Machine. Now they're kind of this interesting mixture of, symphony and opera, but it's this, and goth rock. It's just this combo, and a little bit of metal and stuff. But imagery, like the way these guys in the band, the way they were dressed and they looked, it was just so awesome. So that was my first exposure. I was like, yo, like, I want to look like those guys. Like, that is so cool. So that kind of was what really got me into that. And I was into some metal bands and stuff like that. But anyway, going along into that, like into my teenage years, I was your stereotypical, what you would call baby bat or mall goth, whatever you want to say. But that early 2000s, I was into, Korn, Coal Chamber, Slipknot, and like those types of bands. Slipknot. So I know a lot of folks when you like my age that are in the scene still and stuff. Like some of y'all, like that was kind of your roots. I will at least give myself a little bit of goth street cred, because at the time I also was into these weird, obscure like Christian bands. So like I got exposed to like Savior Machine and The Awakening like back then, and also some of the black metal bands like Schleckvock and those bands out there. So that was kind of it was a weird time. I was into these underground bands, but also like these mainstream acts at the same time. So anyway, as I got older, I evolved with the music. Roughly after I was into those kind of mainstream bands, in 2002, 2003, I was able to get the like Metropolis mix albums, and I was exposed to a lot of great music then. In the 90s, I was into like Rammstein, and I was later on, I found out about stuff like Ministry and KMFDM and Hansel and Gretel. So I got to get into those bands. So these mix CDs would have those tracks, and then from there, if I liked a certain artist, I would buy the album later on. So that was kind of the early 2000s, and that's kind of how that all budded. And I think the big turning point, because I was really, at that time, I was more into metal. But in 2004, it might have been, it was the winter of 2004. So it could have been 2005, like that, like right after New Year's, because we all went down, a group of friends of mine, we went down in Philly, we went to South Street, and we went to Digital Ferret, which was an incredible record store, one of the best in the country for goth, rock, industrial, and all those, and also metal too. And now they have Digital Underground. It's still well, back then it was at a different location, and then they moved a couple years later, but they still have the part of the record store there too, and they also have metal. So there's still some good stuff there. You can get some new albums. So anywho, I found out about this band Blue Tangle, and I bought the album Demon Kiss there, and that album that really is what got me into goth, dark wave. You know, that album really was a turning point. So from there, I really got into a bunch of other groups. So in 2005, there was my first exposure to the genre of agrotech. I went to see Grendel in Trenton, New Jersey at this event called Flux. And if any of y'all watching this remember that, you know, hey, mad props. But Flux. And they had Grendel there. And I got to see them, and I remember at the time I was like, "Oh, this is so weird. It's like electronic music, but with like you know, black metal vocalist." I was like, "This is so strange." So, but that was my first exposure. About that time, and over the next couple of years, I actually, you know, got into more of your traditional, actual goth rock music. Fear Cult, you know, the classics, of course, but Fear Cult and Clan of Zymox, those were kind of the first bands I really got into. And so a couple years after that, in the later 2000s, around 2008, 2009, that's when I really got into the agrotech scene with like Tactical Sect, Suicide Commando, Hosiko, God Module, that type of stuff. And then 2009, I went to Germany, went to Mera Luna, got to see so many amazing bands. Goodness gracious. Well, Blue Tangle was there, one of the main group I wanted to see. There was Tisk Luder, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but they were there. Frozen Plasma, Grendel was there. Who else? Zeromancer and Birthday Massacre was there too. Crew Shadows, and I mean, I had seen those bands before, but it was great being in like this massive, you know, it was a former Royal Air Force base, and they had this massive stage. There was like 10,000 people, and they're all gothed out and everything, and I was like, man, this is incredible. So that was an awesome experience. From there, the next year, my agrotech band, Primary Sector, that had started. I had actually met Zach, my band member, at a Cyclone 9 concert in New York City. Met there, and I took a picture with him and the singer, and we exchanged emails, so I sent him the picture, and then we stayed in touch. So one of the big reasons why we formed was because we were discussing our previous bands. I had a, you know, death thrash metal band I was in for 5 years before that, and so when we were talking, I was like, yeah, man, I really want to do like industrial music and agrotech, and like I feel like you know, the scene needs just this, you know, fresh experimental band of just having fun with it. So we started after that, and we made some, in my opinion, it's fun, awesome music, but you know, hey, whatever, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. But either way, it was just great being able to just have fun. It was just such a different scene than the metal scene, because in metal, you know, you have like, you know, 5 to 10 bands, and we're all playing in a row, and just that's how it is. But with that band, you know, we would headline club events, and you just have the DJs and, you know, club patrons, and then boom, at like, you know, midnight or whatever, we'd go on and perform, and people are just hanging out, having a great time. It was just totally different vibe. So it was just such a fun time. And a lot of like electronic music was getting big in kind of that 2010-ish, you know, time frame. So we did it at such a great time, and it was just fun experience writing the music and being a part of the scene. And from the metal band is funny, because in the metal band, you know, I'd like have a look or whatever and just, you know, be in the metal scene. But with the industrial band, like I really got to like, you know, let my goth side out and just goth out and, you know, dress up and have just a great time with it. So really fun experience. So at that point, the scene was doing really well. You had Kinetic Festival in 2010 up in Montreal, and they had all these great bands. And then there was Trident Festival in New York City, and such a great lineup there. And then the next year for me, I went back over to Germany, went to the Wave Gothic Treffen, and so that's like, you know, that's the Grand Poobah right there, the capital of Goth. So it was just awesome. Got to see so many different bands in so many of the different subgenres of Goth, because there you have kind of a celebration of all the subgenres, and also metal, etc. So so many bands. It was great seeing like cyber goths rocking out to black metal, and you had metalheads, you know, listening to folk music or goth rock and everything in between. So just a great experience. So I highly recommend going out there for any of y'all goth travelers out there. So next, after that in my life, when it comes to the music, I joined the military. And once I was down there by the Pensacola area, there was a lot less of a scene, of course, than comparing it to Philly, New York. So a lot of times I'd have to trek out to either New Orleans to see like a concert or an event, or my wife and I, we'd have to go to Tampa to like the castle. And it was really great being able to see the scene and like some of the differences. Some of them were smaller, like some concerts would be smaller, and some of it was a little bit of a shock because a band that I know would do really well in Philly, you know, there'd be, you know, half the people there in one of the other cities or something like that. So it really made me appreciate what I came from and how good the scene was. So you can have, you know, folks, you can complain, you know, there's going to be plus and minuses, but hey, you know, Philly's, you know, done pretty good, and it's the East Coast. We got a pretty strong scene, so it's pretty awesome. So, anywho, that's kind of for me, my little musical journey. I'd say that's more of my musical journey into goth industrial, fashion wise. You know, once I was exposed to it, you know. I had longer hair back then, you know, I miss my hair. But anywho, you know, the imagery and dressing up, you know, it's just awesome. And you know, film and literature was always a big influence, Dracula and all that cool stuff. So anywho, that's kind of my gothic journey, and it continues on. So all the best to y'all, and till next time.